will also take into consideration our settings in Athens and Greece. The speech is titled "In Search of a New Daedalus, Heterodox Economics as a Radical and Realistic Approach to Global Contradictions." Maciej, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Really honored to have this speech. I'm a bit stressed at the moment, to be honest. So yeah, let's start because I think we are a bit over the time. Yeah. So we live in the age of fire, both metaphorically, times of war, pandemic, famine, migrations, but also very, very physically. So these are the pictures from just 2 days ago. On a few kilometers away, we have this blazing fires. And actually, it seems like like the aggravated contradictions in the global economy that aggravated over the decades are at the moment erupting. I will just focus in my speech on one of these contradictions related to the scale of global economy. At the moment, actually, as you see in this picture, we consume and produce more than our Earth can sustain. Actually, we produce like we would have over nearly 2 Earths. And in a week time, in 28th of July, we start consuming more than our Earth can contain. In a more scientific framework of so-called planetary boundaries, there are 9 key global processes identified by the Earth system scientists. And as you see in this picture, in some areas, we are already in the very risky zone. The ones related, for instance, to biochemical flows, of course, climate change, but also biodiversity or deforestation. So the scale of our production and economy is too large, and it starts to become a huge threat for the stability of Earth systems. And I think these challenges or threats are widely recognized by the contemporary societies. It's recognized that we do not need change in the system. We do not have to follow business as usual, but rather we need a profound systemic change. Also, many sciences call for this systemic change rather than reformist or business as usual approaches. And I come here as an economist. Economics is a peculiar role here in this setting, because economists are scientists as well. And well, some of them identify as social scientists, some of them feel they are closer to physics or mathematics, perhaps. But economists are also policy advisors or policy makers, so they change the world they try to describe, and they are heavily involved in these global processes. Also, economists are often perceived as keepers of some secret knowledge or even priests of a religion or a mythology. And some of them, they boast to be experts in almost everything and try to approach their universal rational agent method to almost any problem of the humanity. However, despite this own influence, they often fail to meet their challenge. And for instance, in this UK British trust survey, economists are almost at the bottom of social trust, close to the politicians. So it tells a lot about the shape of our faculty. Other scientists and historians are close to the top of the trust. So the aim of my speech today is to answer a question: can economics be helpful solve these global contradictions, in particular related to ecological and climate crisis. And I will try to learn some lessons, how economics as science detached from reality, and how can it change. My thesis is that, yes, we need heterodoxy, but rather we do not need a new orthodoxy. My case study is related to economic growth and planetary boundaries, and I myself, I am personally a bit of a convert. I was trained in mainstream orthodox economics, and then in time I turned heterodox. So I have a bit of perspectives from both sides of the debate. So the key theme is the economic growth, and I believe we have people from different disciplines here. So a bit of short introduction. What is economic growth? So it is basically a process of expansion of GDP. So of the total flow of output, the output in the monetary part of the economy. So it means basically that every year we produce more and more. And as many growth processes, in principle, it can have exponential character. Like in this so-called hockey stick picture on the right-hand side, where you see that GDP in many countries, especially in the global north, was almost stable throughout the history, and then interrupted and is growing exponentially in the last 2 to 3 centuries. Economic growth is a recent phenomenon. Also, it is quite rare. It relates only to some parts of the global economy, and it's very unequal. It is based on capitalist institutions and, in principle, technologies of energy from fossil fuels. What's important is that economic growth does not translate automatically into social needs or quality of life. The fact that we produce more, that does not mean that we are more satisfied. So there are nowadays 2 contradictory narratives. One of the mainstream economics, NE, so growth as the only ultimate road to development, whereas the other, promoted by numerous heterodox scholars, is that we are rather addicted to growth. It is rather like a better drug than a medicine. Because one of the downsides of economic growth is that we utilize more and more natural resources, and we have more and more pressure on the biosphere. These pictures may not look well visible for you, but in principle they demonstrate in the global usage, for instance, of metals, of plastics, of water, of fossil fuels in a global economy in the last 2 centuries. As you see, they are close to parallel with the GDP line. However, what other disciplines, not economics, but like biology, physics, engineering, also technology sciences, they tell us that we have some boundaries to material production. This GDP growth cannot go infinitely. So, for instance, we have thermodynamic limits of the Earth system, where more production uses more energy and generates more heat and entropy. Also, we have the aforementioned already planetary boundaries, so that our Earth cannot contain more waste and also cannot provide more resources. We see already that many key resources are increasingly depleted and are really in low availability. What's more, we are at the moment in a particular lock-in in our industrial systems based on fossil fuels. Over the centuries we generated, we produced as societies, as social classes, we produce huge production systems, huge infrastructures, huge machines and factories, which are based on a particular way of producing, based on fossil fuels. It's not like we can now change it in 10, 20 years to another way of doing things. It's not like we can achieve a very abrupt, radical technical change. So the time scales are key here. We have planetary challenges, and all the climate scientists tell us that we have 10, maybe 15 years to change and we do not have this time to change our economy to maintain growth. So, for instance, to give you a case, is the resource depletion. Many resources key in global manufacturing production are now depleted, starting from sand, necessary to produce concrete and glass, which is in global shortage, but also fossil fuels, gas, oil, and many others. For instance, this graph from Simon Michaud, the geologist, shows us the declining quality and availability of ores of key metals like copper, lead, zinc, and gold, and so on. So in a way, we are facing this limits to growth, which will come very, very promptly. And first takeaway from this introduction is that economic growth on a global scale cannot go on, but also that it must not go on due to biophysical boundaries. And now let's see what economics, that is mainstream economics, thinks about it. So mainstream economics is like the Icarus. It would like to grow forever. It has infinite ambitions, but also infinite prescriptions, recommendations, solutions to the challenges. I put it in basics, right? Because obviously science is a bit more complex than here, but in principle, we have this message: growth is possible. Also, green growth is possible, the one which is decoupled from pressure on environment. And also, we see that growth is good. So, we need more growth. Even we need more growth to, for instance, to solve this contradiction. We need more GDP growth to solve inequalities, to solve hunger, and so on. We hear this message all the time. Examples? Let's start with the Nobel Prize winner, William Nordhaus, from, I think, 3 years ago. His famous DICE modeling of the integrated climate and economy models recommended that actually the optimal way of managing global economy is to heat global atmosphere by over 4 Celsius degrees. This would be the optimal path, the one which would be the most beneficial for global economy according to the Nobel Prize winners. Well, actually, in the 4, it is needless to say, I think, in this community here, that in 4 degrees, there will be maybe not no life, but no human civilization as we know it anymore. And there are more, And there are more examples. Actually, this type of modeling is very influential also for the IPCC reports. It's embedded in this green growth narrative that growth can be green, the growth can be decoupled, so-called, from pressure and emission of carbon dioxide. It is visible in, for instance, European Green New Deal strategy, which is basically based on electrification and producing even more, for instance, electric vehicles. It is still the basics of teaching of new economic models, so-called Econ 101 course. So mainstream economics is at a huge denial. It cannot accept its limits to growth. And I will spend a couple of minutes to see why mainstream economics denies the limits to growth. What is the reason for such absurd statements of mine? And first, these are the theoretical and methodological reasons. So we come to the structure of science. I don't know if you see properly this comic, and the guy lost his wallet, is looking for it under the lantern, the street lantern, and comes and asks, why is it here that you lost this wallet? No, I lost it elsewhere, but here's the light. And this is the thing with mainstream economics. It puts certain boundaries to its thinking, very abstract boundaries, like humans are perfectly rational, people are individualistic, we can abstract from material and energy basis of the production. And with these boundaries, we can go elsewhere, we can go to another reality and think, for instance, about infinite growth. in this abstract reality, it may work because we have no physical linguistic growth, we have no social economic linguistic growth. Also because markets are assumed to be the perfect, efficient allocation mechanisms, so-called general equilibrium framework, it seems that every growth is good. Because we grow, well, we grow because we want it, assuming to be mainstream economics. So, to show you a basic framework of economic modeling, this is the basis, the circular flow. We have firms, we have households, there are some payments, some goods and services, flows of labor and capital. There is no earth, there is no energy, there is no matter here. This is just an abstract monetary framework, right? And this is the basis of contemporary growth modeling, where we have just simple function. Y is the product, which is a function of capital and labor. Capital and labor being like abstract units without need of energy, without need of matter, without any pressure of the environment. Also, there are some further methodological limitations. When you look closely to the mainstream economics, which is like a huge science, it is, we have thousands of brilliant people over there, thousands of really devoted, often very ambitious, and even working for the ambition of working for the humanity people. However, when you look in the structure of science, there are many fallacies. And for instance, falsification. Mainstream economics, well, has this ambition to be a positivist science. But when you look at the structure of falsification, it doesn't work at all. Many models are falsified, do not fit to the reality, but they are still maintained. There are numerous ad hoc assumptions. And for instance, this so-called decoupling. Decoupling has been falsified empirically numerous times. When you look at huge meta-analyses, I put for you 3 of them here. 3 meta-analyses about the relation between GDP growth and pressure on production, material use, pressure on environment in terms of CO2 emissions or material use. All of them agree that we cannot decouple production from material use. We cannot decouple quickly or fastly and fully production from CO2 emissions. That is the way production is organized. Where if we want to achieve IPCC targets, we just need to start producing less. And even despite this decoupling is still maintained in many mainstream models. And now the second aspect, coming to the, not the theory, but rather the sociology and politics of science itself. So how the science works as a community of scientists. When we look into this, we see that in mainstream economics, growth is a key pillar of its hegemony. When we put growth out of mainstream economics, its message collapses. It seems that we do not have any more justifications for markets or private capital, because if growth collapses, we need to find other ways of solving things, other ways of providing to the people than just GDP growth. So the whole framework is collapsing. Also, growth modeling, for instance, for many young scholars is the only possible way for academic career. And many of the economists, especially the top one, are very highly politically entangled. So they promote growth because it's profitable for them. And when we look, for instance, at the green growth, in practice, it turns out as a way of earning by capital on partial transition. And it's very similar. Perhaps many of you know the debates about sustainable development. It's a mistaken strategy for the global south. Green growth is its parallel as a mistaken strategy for the global north. So the takeaway too is that mainstream economics is structurally locked into this growth orientation. And just as Icarus burned himself, it seems like mainstream economics would rather see the world burning than abandon some of its assumptions. So we need to abandon it before they burn the world. So what we need is we need Daedalus instead of Icarus. So the key questions today is how to abandon growth, how to prosper without growth. To answer these questions, we need economics, right? But fit for purpose, productive to solve sustainability transitions, like Inga Rebka wrote in her great paper 2 years ago. The economics we need should be realistic, even radically realistic, telling us the hard truth, yet also theoretically grounded. It should be engaged, it should be helpful, useful, but also critical of the reality and also autonomous. It should be very ambitious, yet also self-critical and humble. Yes. And I would argue, so in particular, we need economics that will be able to explain interrelations between monetary, biophysical, and social elements that would analyze collective and systemic features that will move beyond efficiency towards also questions of distribution of income and scale of production. That would capture political aspects like power, inequalities, institutions, conflicts. That will be emotion, that will capture dynamics, that will start with the precautionary principle. We cannot take the huge risks of going into becoming a catastrophe. That would highlight implementation challenges, will focus on deep transformation instead of shallow change, and it will envision future alternatives instead of simply critiquing what is at the moment. And I argue that some elements in the so-called heterodox economics are fit for this purpose. And ecological economics is part of this heterodox framework. So what is heterodox economics basically? So I can put for you the 6 elements of 6 pillars. So we have different schools there. They are critical of mainstream, but they are plural themselves. They are liberalistic. They focus on also critical view of capitalism. They are often interdisciplinary, working together with other disciplines of social and other sciences as well. But also they are politically engaged. Politically engaged in a explicit manner, not in a hidden one. So heterodox economics often do not have this ambition of being only a positive science. And we have this vision, very simple vision of economy, which I showed you before, of circular flow. What is the vision of economy in heterodox economics? There is this nice quote by Jovan Todorova that economics should be a study of social provisioning process, covering different range of activities, market, non-market, paid and unpaid. So we have this so-called layer cake vision, where we have different layers in the provisioning system. Mother Nature, so-called love economy, so all the activities which we do because we care about others, we care about nature, we care about our close and relatives. Then we have the monetized economy. There is a private sector, but also public sector and grey economy. And yet another vision from ecological economists now. This is the circular flow, which is much more realistic. As you see, there are many, many more arrows here, interrelated with nature, with sun energy. We have energy from sun, we have different sources of energy, we have materials, we interact with plants and animals, and then we have some waste. So, as you see, this is much more complex vision than simple circular flow. And the question of growth, coming back for a moment, growth has been a key element of heterodox schools as well. But as you see, this view is much more ambiguous than the growth is good or we need growth narrative of mainstream. So, for instance, post-Keynesians perceive growth as incidental, unstable, and unequal. Evolutionary economists look at the technical change in complex systems. Marxists perceive growth as a reflection of capital accumulation, often very, very unequal on global scale. Feminist economists perceive growth as expropriation, expansion of monetary sphere, often at cost of the care economy. And ecological economists often perceive growth as simply distraction, as non-economic growth, actually. Like in this quote by Jason Kickel, a more holistic way of thinking about growth is to recognize it is broadly equivalent to the rate at which our economy is metabolizing the living world. Past a certain point, it becomes extremely distractive. World growth describes now what has become a process of breakdown. Another category, so-called degrowth, is now emerging as a spanning concept. And there is huge discussion. It's not like degrowth is the only goal. There is huge discussion whether we can attain it, how to do it. Degrowth is a planned reduction of energy and resource. The planned one, designed to bring economy back to the balance with the living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. And different schools take their accounts, whether it's possible, whether we can have innovations without growth. What political transitions do we need to achieve growth? How can we appreciate reproductive labor and earth care? And how can we adjust the systems of provisioning to planetary boundaries? I will just show you maybe two examples of this thinking about growth and degrowth. Maybe one from feminist economics. They take a look at what escapes conventional growth accounts. And Stefania Darka, I recommend this book, it's an amazing one about forces of reproduction. She writes about care work, but also so-called earth care, a specific kind of caring work where people and their communities care about the land when they live, the forests, the animals, the plants, they nurture it, they garden, they work with the animals and so on. This is also a work, this provides goods and services, but it's not included into growth account. It does not lead to GDP. It's not profitable. It's not productive, perhaps, in a conventional sense. Second case, so-called social system of provision approach from ecological economics, where teams from Leeds, also I recommend this website for you, I cooperate with them as well. They, for instance, analyze whether it is really possible to reduce energy and material use in a way that is maintaining social needs as well. And like you see in this figure, we have different scenarios from IPCC and International Energy Agency reports, but also these little arrows down there, they demonstrate that we could reduce current energy use by 3 times even, maintaining social needs for all the people in the world. So it's really possible, but we need to reorganize our system. So the third takeaway, coming to the end, is that the balances which we look for, they are already there, but we just need to let them work. So it's time for a term in economics, but a wise one, like in this metaphor from mass industrial agriculture to permaculture, vibrant, pluralist, one way of doing science. And finally, what were the lessons I took when I was preparing the speech? Is that we do not need more or new ivory towers. It's not enough to destroy the old ones, but we shouldn't build new ones. We need economics which is the Dallas style. It is wise, helpful, ambitious, radical, yet also realistic and humble. It doesn't want to burn itself on the way to achieving its goal. And it is already there in the pluralist schools of heterodox economics. However, when I think of it, it is still the Icarus who takes all the flesh, all the publicity, good and bad one. So what we need, well, we need to do our job, of course, but also aim for strength. Be ambitious, go to the social movements, go go to the communities, go to the politicians, work with them. But also economists should nurture pluralism. They should not build new orthodoxy. The pluralism is the power of heterodox economics, actually. It's the vibrant fruit of the power. And we should control quality. We should remember about our scientific virtues. Finally, perhaps we should build new structures in the academia, but also we should build strong two-way relations with social actors, social movements, social communities. That is the way economics can gain its power. Yeah, thank you very much. That's very curious. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation and thinking of the challenges of layers and complex thinking and sensitivities. But I think one of the most important takeaways is not thinking alternatives through visions of hubris, of a kind of black and white dialectic of radical transformation without inner critique of your own position. So thank you very much. Okay, so what we're going to do now, because we are actually late and on time altogether, and I'm conscious of us being able to go upstairs to the next session, which is really important. We will not do question and answer right now. Is that what we're going to do is we can talk for the next 2 days together. We can ask questions during the coffee break. But what we're doing right now is we're going to be moving to the talking circle. So the English language presenters are going to be moving to the talking circles. And the talking circles are an informal session. Every room has one of the themes of the conference that you're a part of. You'll see it in the program. They're all on the 8th floor. So what I encourage you to do is to pick a room or an area that best fits your research topic. Go to that room, introduce yourself, say who you are, where you've come from. When you're presenting, it's a wonderful way for us to get to know each other, and I want to make sure we get the most time for that session. So I'll be at the door if you have any questions about that and to help guide you, but everything will be back on the 8th floor. Now I'm going to hand over to José Luis to give the Spanish language instructions.
Thank you, Philip. Bien, solamente recordarles que ahora no ha habido la sesión de preguntas y respuestas porque vamos de tiempo. Bueno, lo que decía, tenemos ahora a las 10:30 la mesa redonda, que será en la habitación número 6, en la 8ª planta. Hay una cuestión que no viene mucho ahora mismo, pero yo la recuerdo. El acceso al Wi-Fi, al Wi-Fi, en cada una de las habitaciones está puesto un código QR que pueden ver con su teléfono y ahí tienen para poder conectarse. Y en esta está aquí, ahora lo vamos a poner en la puerta principal también, ¿vale? Tendremos entonces la mesa redonda a las 10:30 y luego la sesión plenaria, que será a las 11:25, esa de nuevo sí será aquí en esta sala. ¿De acuerdo? Bien, muchísimas gracias.
Slides for a moment.